What's up, Bitcoiners? Indeed, the sun, super duper up. Bitcoin running just fine. We're good. Let's have coffee. Talk about what's new. Kevin Opar says, "Hello, dudes and dudettes. Indeed, we need more dudettes around here." Um, Utah, what's up? Mudcast in real life. Sunny, sun is up. Good morning, Daniel. Good morning, Bitcoin Graffiti. Again, good morning. Good morning, P-Man Van. Good morning, all. Good morning, all. As you know, we like to start our show with the fakest news we can find. CNN provides today. CNN Politics wrote about now it's all kinds of coverage on Ohio and the train, but this one's great. So they mentioned there's all kinds of stuff going on there. Visiting now, we had Buttigieg there yesterday. Of course, Trump went. Here's their headline: Ohio's toxic spill is unleashing poisonous partisan politics. It's pretty good. Good for them. Good for them. I like I write a lot of headlines for this show and titles. Right? It's always fun when you can get a double meaning in there. It's good. It's great. They did a great job. You could call it Moscow time, but it's so much worse than just fake news. It's this NATO tweet, and I'm going to read it to you in a second. And this NATO tweet, I think gives one of the best frames we can have for where we're at in the world today, and just how close Bitcoin is to winning if you really analyze it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to show what I think is a peace plan, and how the pieces are all moving into place as we speak. So NATO, we all know NATO, right? Wrote a series of tweets yesterday that received so much backlash. I'm sure you've seen them. I'm sure you've read them, but I'll read it. So here was the ninth tweet in a 10 tweet thread, but it's the ninth tweet that got the most reaction. So here's what they say: Ukraine is hosting one of the great epics of this century. We are Harry Potter and William Wallace, the Na'vi and Han Solo. We're escaping from Shawshank and blowing up the Death Star. We are fighting the Harkonnens and challenging Thanos. So I tweeted, they're telling you it's a show, right? They're telling you, and the picture with it was just a bombed out shithole Ukraine that it's become, right? Just a disgusting mess of human misery and awfulness. And so they're saying, but don't worry, right? This is all those you all love, right? We're going to win. It's going to be great. And they're here underlining that the drama of Hollywood is very similar to what people are experiencing here. Now, what this makes you think of is it's not even so much the tell, right? That a lot of people covered the tell yesterday. It's a show, right? I tweeted that. That was a really common reaction. But of course, Cernovich has, I think, the best reaction to all of it. And this is what Cernovich said. And this is what really brought it into context for me. He says, it's the first ever war where the propaganda was directed not at the warrior class or Southern men seeking adventure. This is for Reddit. This is for Reddit. Yeah, I would say that's a good observation. It's not just for Reddit in a sense. It's also for the wider context of your armchair general, of your voyeur, of your person who is still unaware of the irony of Smells Like Teen Spirit and everything that Kurt Cobain predicted 30 something years ago when he said, here we are now, entered. And to see it come full circle, right? No one's willing to participate. They're going to watch, right? It's on TV. They're going to watch it. It's like the conclusion of the Truman Show, if you remember that movie, when they all cheer him on to get out of the pod and out of the studio, and then when he does, what else is on TV, right? And you can really tell through what Cernovich has said here that it's a big difference. It's not a mild difference. They're not actually trying to recruit people to go to war here. What they're really trying to do is recruit the mental cover, the psychological cover, in order to continue to propagate this war. And that makes it all the more different, right? That makes it all the more different because as we move forward, we're starting to get these follow the money analyses of what's going on, right? The follow the money analysis. And the thing that follow the money does, you can talk about how it could indict people, it could undermine people's criminality. Maybe that's not what we're interested in here. What I like about follow the money is it predicts, right? If you start following the money, you're going to get a series of events that are more predictive because people will see it, people will observe the chain of influence, why persuasion was created in the first place, why this sort of psychological cover was developed in the first place. And War Clandestine here was talking about his year now of predicting based on a follow the money analysis of what went on in Ukraine. So here we go today. And I've been talking about War Clandestine a lot lately. He's just had a series of tweets over the past little while, which I think are pretty clear and really put distinction, contrast, and definition on the belligerence of World War III. And this is what he says. 1 year ago today, I wrote a thread that changed the global geopolitical landscape. This thread caused the deep state to overplay their hand, forcing them to commit one of the most obvious censorship and gaslighting campaigns in history. One story can change the world. And he mentions his original one, holy shit. So this is him retweeting himself from exactly 1 year ago. Holy shit. I think I may be onto something about Ukraine. Zelensky said the Russians are firing at military installations. How broad is that term? I am seeing speculation that could include US installed biolabs. At first, I was like, no way. Then I started digging. So here he's talking about the need for, after this was uncovered, the reality of US funded biolabs in Ukraine to the surface, there's been a massive requirement is what he's saying, for gaslighting and censorship campaigns in order to maintain narrative consistency and not allow anything to spill out of this all-encompassing narrative enclosure. And that's why the Hollywoodization of the messaging has become so persistent and now blatant, right? Where they're literally saying, this is the Death Star. You're watching a movie. And if you watch the movie, you'll see the good guys are going to win and we're the good guys. And all of these really, they are effective. Like, let's not say this is not effective propaganda. This is the most sophisticated psychological operations you've ever seen, right? These are. And most people are not able to perceive the difference. However, when this follow the money analysis starts to become more of an influence on what's going on, we're going to see, I think, the narrative forced to change. And there's a reason for it, and we'll work our way there, right? So first of all, yesterday you had here's part of the follow the money analysis, right? You had new analysis on new criminal charges on SBF. And what they're saying here is that they're looking into his it was $36 billion, $36 billion that he had tied up in some of these stable coins. I mean, the number is astronomical, right? And it looks like this dirty bubble media, Mike Burgersberg, Doomberg retweeted him. So I've never heard of this person and cannot vouch for their research whatsoever. But it's interesting, so I'm sharing it. So it looks like this block was a sort of a division of Alameda Research. And it looks like they were the ones flowing through Ethereum, all kinds of stable coins back and forth, and was part of the piggy bank operation. Now, a lot of people have had a look at some of the indictments that we've seen related yesterday, which start referencing some of these things. And it looks like the fact that this was a money laundering operation, is going to be surfaced. It's going to become pretty clear. And I don't think there's any way to hide it anymore. Not that people were waiting on this, not that people were confused, but we didn't have a true follow the money analysis yet. There's a lot of obfuscation, a lot of, I like dirty bubble media, Christian says. Yeah, I had never heard of it before. So I started following, and I'm sure I'm going to get more content from them. So what it looks like through this analysis is we're going to have a better idea of how the money was flowing and where it was going and what was happening with it. Now, if you put that together, right, with this whole argument of Ukraine and this Hollywoodization and everything that's going on there, and if you remember the first story we discussed today, the Ohio fake news story that CNN Politics published, right? And then put it in context with what Cernovich said, like this is propaganda towards the armchair general, towards the keyboard warrior, not towards getting Southern men to go seeking adventure and defend America and all of these things that used to be the hallmark of American propaganda. And you could see pervasively in every one of the wars America has had. If you look at the Civil War, for example, remember, Abraham Lincoln owned something like 150 newspapers and was a major propagandist. And so were a lot of Southern people. Now, these newspapers were more like blogs, right? They didn't have to run every day, and they were a series of essays, and they would print them. And there was a ton of that kind of propaganda in the Civil War, just like there was a ton of that propaganda in World War I and World War II. So getting these men to motivate themselves, go to war and defend America was the orientation and direction of the propaganda. Doesn't look like it's the case anymore. It looks like getting people to be armchair quarterbacks is enough, right? But if we do this follow the money analysis, we find out indeed there was a massive money laundering operation going on with SBF and Ukraine. And now we think about all the money that continues to head to Ukraine, right? You can start to imagine that the same thing Abraham Lincoln said all those years ago, a house divided cannot stand, right? That's what he was talking about the whole Civil War context, right? A house divided cannot stand. And remember, the statement when he said it penetrated people's minds a little more because most people did build their own houses back then. And people could understand that if you didn't get the roof straight and if you didn't get all these things, the thing would fall apart, right? So the engineering in building your own house was top of mind to a lot of people. And yeah, no, Abraham Lincoln was a major newspaper owner. Yeah, major, huge newspaper owner. So was everyone, though. I mean, it was not, it's like having websites at this point, right? Don't think of it as he didn't own the New York Times. I don't was he even around then. But yeah, he was definitely a newspaper owner. So you got to wonder who's going to get inspired, right? Are we going to be able to muster an actual military force to go over to Ukraine? I don't think so. I don't think we're ever going to get there, right? I think that most males are sort of checked out when it comes to politics. And, I've seen all these numbers now for even college participation, like men are just not even going anymore. And the workforce, right? There was one of these fake news stories last week that I saw that celebrated, it's actually a good thing that the workforce is now majority female. Maybe I'm not here to criticize or comment on what's a good thing or not, but we have passed the inflection point, and men are at this point sort of sitting around, right? We can see it everywhere. And listless, and we see the suicide. We see all of these really poor demographic markers for males. And it reminded me of a book or of a writer who I learned about. So his name is Emmanuel Todd. And Emmanuel Todd was American French guy. He went to where I went to school in France. And so I knew a lot about him because the French curriculum tends to teach its own talent, I guess you will, especially when it comes to like American focused politics. They have their whole unique and own take on Americana and American foreign influence. I wouldn't say in general it's worth your while to go and read. A lot of it is your typical inferiority complex stuff, right? It's America, and we're not it, so we can criticize it. But there's a few good ones, and this fella here, Emmanuel Todd, was able to predict, believe it or not, in 1976, he predicted the end of the Soviet Union. How did he do it? This is what he said. Pardon me. He said the Soviet Union, one of the independent economists was arguing, pardon me, A French analyst has documented this. The number of women who die in childbirth in the Soviet Union has been decreasing since the Bolshevik Revolution. But suddenly, in the early 70s, the statistic changed, and it got worse from then on. And Russians finally grasped how revealing the statistic was and stopped reporting it, right? So this is what he said. What in God's name does a statistic about the number of women who die in childbirth have to do with analyzing Soviet military spending? A company analyst snarled across the table. If you people knew how to interpret statistics, you'd know everything is related. And it was just that. It was just that women are dying in childbirth was enough for him to say the system is going to crack. It can't make it. He didn't need to know anything else. And he accurately predicted as a really young guy. He was like early 20s when he did this. And he's written from then books on American hegemony and American unipolarity in the world, and had a lot to say about the fall of the Soviet Union and the aftermath and what America did. And he started to predict things with America based on statistics, right? Demographics, nothing to do with military spending, nothing to do with industrial capacity, nothing. There's no doubt America leads in all of these things, right? Because America can absorb everything. The world still comes to America to invent the thing, right? That hasn't changed. But that's not really what captures the follow the money predictives of what's going on with these demographics on top of it. So this is what he says. The United States became an empire not by strategy, but by accident, following the sudden death of its main adversary, the Soviet Union. With the globalization of investment and then in the luxury of conspicuous consumption using incoming capital deeper and deeper into debt. The reality is America is like a crumbling, overextended and excessive arms spending, inequality, and disgruntlement. He was writing this 20-something years ago. He was writing this when I was a student in France, a long time ago. To keep the rest of the world in line, creditors calling in their debts, all America needs to do is to wield a big. The real America is too weak to take on anyone except military midgets. This is why there is such hostility to states such as North Korea, Cuba, a underdeveloped country of 24 million exhausted by a decade of sanctions. So he's ready to Iraq war. Such conflicts that present little or no military risk allows throughout the world. Further, the theatrical media coverage must not blind us to a flood. The size of the opponent chosen by the U.S. is the true indicator of its current power. It argues that America would be incapable of challenging a more powerful country, and that one threat to global stability hangs over the world today, the U.S. itself, which is a protector and is now a predator. So he predicts from here that America simply will not have the will, right? It's a question of will. They won't have the will to perpetuate. And think about it for a second. Is there enough will amongst American males to go to Europe? I mean, a couple guys. I've heard this guy and that guy goes there, and there's no doubt American fighting capacity is tops in the world, right? What Americans did in Afghanistan, what a set of trained, focused military units were able to accomplish is some of the greatest stuff we've ever seen in the history of heroism, bravery, all those things, right? So the actual American soldier still, I think, stands at the top of the heap, right? Just in caloric intake and general health and general capacity, and probably in his training and understanding of how to use all the different tools that are being developed and what works and what doesn't, and all those things. So that's not what I'm saying. It's the cohesive capacity of the entire military structure, the hierarchy, the generals, right? America has now become one of these countries where the generals, if you see Miley all the time, right? He's got like 1,000 badges. He's never seen active duty in his life, and he's got all of these badges on him, right? So you start to imagine that the capacity that America has, the appetite that Americans have to fight is way down, right? And when you think about what they're even fighting for, right? Go over right now. Here's bad news. I'm going to warn Hungary right now. If you're Hungarian, right? If you're Hungarian, be careful, because the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Secretary of State and all of these folks are coming to strengthen your democracy. They've said it. They made a highlight sort of propaganda teaser trailer about them coming and they're going to come help out because it looks like they've got new challenges, they say, in Hungary, right? Go check out this video. You'll see it online. You'll see US State Department produced a propaganda video about how they're coming to Hungary to help them, right? They're going to help them with all kinds of stuff. Well, what's wrong with Hungary right now, right? What's wrong with Hungary? Well, you can buy a house in Budapest. I don't know if any of you have been to Budapest. It is one of the greatest, most beautiful cities in the world, not even close, right? This was a city built in the Austro-Hungarian Empire time when they lived on a gold standard and had saved all their money and had an unbelievable time preference when they created one of the most artistically fruitful empires in the history of the world. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Trust me, I'm not an expert on it by any means. But my understanding of World War I has been changed a lot as a Bitcoiner, right? I've started to see it as the fiat-dominated countries that were pushing the gold-backed countries in a war of finance, and the fiat folks can continue to finance the war machine because it was just dictate, versus the gold-backed countries that had a limited amount of resource. So they crippled the economy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German Empire at the time. While these countries sued for peace consistently throughout the war, they were never afforded anything like peace, right? So similar to what we're seeing with Russia today. And yeah, Budapest is not but here's what we're supposed to believe we're fighting for. If you go to Budapest today, right? And if you're interested in protecting yourself against nation states and the nomadic life, which some people are forced into because they get declared terrorists and because they're Bitcoiners and can't participate in the Canadian economy or other places, right? You know, you can buy a pretty good house for in Budapest right now, 20,000 euros. You can get a decent place, right? I mean, it's not great, but you'll get good internet. It'll be not bad. It'll probably be safer than any American city, right? You can't just go around living in American cities anymore like it's okay. They're not okay. They're super dangerous, right? I'm not going to American cities. No way. No way in hell am I spending time living in an American city anymore with the randomness that goes on there. So you can go buy for $20,000. Now, if you splurge and spend $100K, you're going to get an awesome place. Awesome. Right? And live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. So Americans are just bent over backwards with what we're paying for houses. And look what's happened, right? You get this from Wall Street Silver. U.S. market housing hit with biggest 6-month wipeout since 2008. $2.3 trillion decline. Now, Bitcoiners know, and we've talked about it many, many times on this show, that the failure of fiat money over time has been most acutely expressed in houses being the main store of wealth and the main investment vehicle through which Americans build wealth. And what that's forced us into is more or less every boomer banking on their pension being baked into the mortgage payments and house that they purchased and built and lived in, and the next generation paying the premium on that so that they can go and retire. So imagine that everything in the American system now, because of the nature of the dollar, has forced the real estate industry to pick up the slack and become the store of value that is required for people who want to build their wealth. Now we've got a great stock market, of course, right? And but what about that great stock market? Well, believe it or not, right? You can, with one of these follow the money analysis, go back to SBF, right? Go back to everything we saw with SBF and everything we saw with FTX and the money laundering and what we're going to find out. But remember all the virtue signaling, the ESG stuff, right? Well, we still have our friend, Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, who's trying to push for the ESG component of allocation and investment to be a major feature of US Wall Street. So imagine, he's still pushing for ESG to be a number one factor in how Americans decide to manage this massive wealth transfer we always hear about. Massive wealth transfer, the greatest wealth transfer in the history of the world. How is it going to work out? It's a bonanza. So they're still saying that this whole ESG component is fundamental towards proper American stewardship, blah, blah, blah. Now, there's some people complaining top Republicans double down on efforts to rein in the SEC and Gensler's climate proposal. But you don't need to even know that, right? Forget it. If Gensler isn't out there with all the criticism we've seen of ESG in the past year, let's say, how it's become a joke, more or less. Like, as I program Bitcoin 2023, I don't even fight against ESG as an intellectual idea. I just laugh at it. It's a joke. It's a punchline, right? It's not a thing you actually even have to engage with intellectually. It's zero. It means nothing. And it is just corruption. It's just corruption, right? You've never actually seen any one of these people articulate a defense of it beyond the moralizing, beyond the same propaganda that NATO used to talk about Han Solo and the Na'vi and NATO and the war, and it's a movie, and it's the greatest epic of our time. It's the same kind of narrative cover. It's the same kind of psychological thing going on. And there's never been an actual explanation because there isn't one, right? There is no way you can get beyond bottom line fundamentals for the performance of a company on the stock market and replace it with some gobbledygook about ESG, right? So you don't need to know more. You can yourself determine this is corruption. Remember, the whole innocence until proven guilty thing, right? That applies to human beings. That's for us to not go to jail. That's it, right? Companies, institutions, countries don't get the same benefit of the doubt. Why would they? Right? We created moral people to make companies in order to engage in contractual obligations and responsibilities and to include them into our commercial agreements and our commercial relationships. But that doesn't mean they get everything we get. There's no threat to put a company in jail. So why do they get the benefit of the doubt? They shouldn't, right? This was just transposed onto them. And at this point, I think we're going to be able to peel that back. And folks like the SEC don't get the benefit of the doubt, right? They got to fight their way out of the corner here, and they haven't even tried. They're just using psyops. They're just using manipulation. They're just using the same manipulation that NATO uses in order to get us to cover for a war. But it ain't hitting because this thing with the houses is going to continue, right? Now, did you know that when the original American Revolutionary War was going on, you had the British that were hiring German private armies, right? They'd hire these private armies out of Germany. Germany wasn't a country, and that was one of the things they did for income. I don't know if any of you knew that. The princes of all the different parts of Germany would sell their young men as hired war hands, right? So the British bought a bunch and sent them, and they landed on Long Island. Now, the anecdotes from the David McCullough book, I don't know if you guys know who David McCullough is. If you don't, you got to get into David McCullough right away because he's absolutely the best. David McCullough is the narrator of a lot of Ken Burns films, just a beautiful voice and a pleasure to listen to and all of those things. And David McCullough, in his book on 1776, I think it's one of the greatest books in the history of American politics. David McCullough shared these anecdotes in the book where these Germans that were brought over to fight for the British landed on Long Island, right? It's a beautiful place. I don't know how many of you have been to Long Island, but it's still a beautiful place, right? One of the great spots in America. And I've lived on Long Island, love it. So you go to Long Island, these guys landed, and, by cloak of night, right, walking around, and they would see these houses that the Americans had. Saw the houses they were living in, the 1776 houses, right? Just the average Americans living on Long Island, how they lived. And they decided, just by looking at these houses, there's no way that they could fight against whatever that was. Not because it was evil or good, but they said, if that's how the average people are doing, this is a better place. If the average person has this house, we're not fighting in this war. And it was a big problem. It was a major problem for the British in the end. By bringing these Germans over who, just by looking at what was being offered to the average American, they understood why they were fighting. They understood what they were trying to preserve, and they defected immediately, right? They would go join the Dutch. Pennsylvania Dutch, that's fake, right? They're not Dutch, they're Deutsch, they're Germans, right? Pennsylvania Germans. Some were Dutch, but they're Germans. And there was no Germany, so very difficult to tie them back to each other. But the Germans were sending tons of people over. And they actually brought all kinds of military innovations. They had a longer gun that allowed you to shoot much further. They had started tapering bullets, tapering the barrel of the gun, and it allowed for way more accuracy over much longer distances. And so this became one of the great guerrilla fighting forces of the war, and helped turn the tide. And you had all these Germans that started joining those ranks, the Pennsylvania ranks, because they spoke the same language and they were able to participate, right? But remember, it was the houses, it was the actual houses that persuaded them on site to switch sides and to understand who was. I'm going to Long Island now. It's a beautiful place, Kevin. I'm jealous. Wow, I'm doing okay here, but I love Long Island. I really do. So you end up seeing this housing thing, right? And you understand that if you go to Hungary, you're going to have a great place, right? I know a lot of people in the Bitcoin world that were already living in Ukraine. I have friends who had to evacuate. I have friends who are still there. I have a friend who's American, Indian, married a Ukrainian woman. I met him in Barcelona at a conference and hit it off. Great friends. I've sort of seen him all over the world since then. And, he gives me pretty good up-to-date stuff. He's got his firearm there, and he's definitely a Slavo-Ukrainian guy. I'm not. There's no criticizing people who live in Ukraine and want to defend their country, for sure, right? I'm okay with any of that stuff. But he's not out there saying, "Oh, Americans stay home," or "Americans come fight." That's not really where he's at. He's like, even in a war zone, we live better than Americans. He's got all his family there. He's got a bunch of kids, right? Indian guy with the whole thing. He's a Sikh, right? And he's married a girl there. It's great. It's a great story. So this housing thing is a big deal, right? Now, take the other side of the equation here, right? We see China aligning with Russia, right? We see China, and you've got David Sachs commenting on it, right? David Sachs and Elon Musk saying, giving a bit of historic context to that, right? We had Zelensky saying, if they work together, it's World War III, right? Says me. And then you get Der Spiegel announcing today that Russia and China have entered negotiations for new drones, right? That's the future of war, guys. I mean, it isn't even these people and these men you got to go get. There's going to be drones all over, right? This is a major escalation, right? And then David Sachs comments on it. During the Cold War, the US made an effort to keep Russia and China divided, despite both being murderous communist regimes. Now we're pushing them closer together as a result of Biden's war on autocracy. This is dangerous and foolish. And then Elon Musk replies in the tweets, a Russia-China alliance is inevitable. It will grow much stronger over time. I think that's true. They can grow much stronger over time. And then, China, this is a good one. China just trolling American foreign policy today, effectively, right? The China Foreign Ministry spokesman today wrote that since World War II, the U.S. has tried to overthrow more than 50 foreign governments. They've violently interfered in elections in 30 countries, and they've tried to kill 50 foreign leaders. I haven't fact checked it all. I mean, I can't expect the numbers are exactly true. I think China is pretty good at exaggerating. But it's in the ballpark, right? I mean, I learned that's what we learned in our colleges, right? Guatemala and all this stuff, right? I've never heard anyone refute what went on there. But here's the thing, right? You get China and Russia coming together, right? But still, China has its own real estate problem, and it's much worse than the American one. If you think our real estate problem is bad, remember, 99% of Chinese people are still trying to buy real estate here because theirs is so expensive. When you look at the the ratio of income to housing costs, China is the worst in the world. The ratio is way off, right? Their houses are more expensive than the houses in America, and they make way less money. So they're screwed to this. Not only are they screwed, the corruption has put itself through the financial system. The hedge funds, the builder, all of them that have been sucking up the easy money from the Chinese central bank, has led to a place where none of these buildings are trustworthy to live in. They're having to demolish them all the time. I don't know how many of these demolished house videos you see, demolished apartment buildings, demolished high rises. I don't know how many of them are real. You can fake a lot of this stuff. Remember, never believe anything you see on video, right? A video is worth exactly zero at this point, right? The picture is worth 1,000 words, fake, finished. A video is worth less than a picture, and a picture is worth less than words at this point. Unfortunately, that's how we're living now. So what we've got here is a situation where the housing market in China is worse than America. Now, the stock market, again, much worse than the American stock market, right? We talked about the ESG stuff for a second. The Chinese situation, much worse. They can't participate, first of all. You need all these special provisions and special permissions to even participate. So that's why everyone speculates on housing in a more clear case of systemic corruption than in America, where all of the money has to go to real estate because there's no other place for it to go. You have a situation where the stock market is really not credible. So here we are with two systems in the world that are now fighting, right? Where neither of them have any credibility in housing. All these other places where you can live pretty cheap and have a good life, even here where I am in Barbados. Imagine where I live in Barbados, right? I have my farm, it's land. I don't farm anything on it yet in Vermont. I just got it last year. But my farm in Vermont, which is at the edge of America, right? It's at the very edge of America. My house in Vermont, and if I would buy a house down here, I'd just rent. But if I would buy a house down here, collectively, the two of them wouldn't come out to $500,000. No way. No way. You can buy a house here for $200,000 easily. And in Vermont, same, really cheap still. So you can't even get a condo in New York City for that price, not even a condo. And you get to live this way, right? You get to switch seasons and have a nice time, right? You can't do that if you stay in an American city and subsidize this system. It's just not possible, right? It's just not possible. So I know that, as someone who, believes in fighting World War III, getting out of these economies is a big part of it, right? It's a really big part of it. And if you can do it, it's a big part of it, right? It's super effective and better quality of life in many, many ways. And so now, right, you think of these two systems, China and America, both of them with massive economic incredulousness, right? No one believes in these systems anymore. No one is participating. The Chinese, I think, can use their propaganda to get a pretty good army going, right? They've been pushing it for a long time. We could probably muster something, right? But I don't think it's going to happen. And when you look at the failures of both of these economic systems, it becomes clear. It becomes clear that if Bitcoin sits in the middle of America and China and their failed economic systems, you can actually start taking care of peace, right? I call it the ABC peace plan, the America, Bitcoin, China peace plan. And all it means is Bitcoin becomes the common reference for international trade, particularly in energy, right? As the petrodollar dies and the BRICS countries try to create their new currency to be a energy market currency, it's going to be a shitcoin, guys. It ain't going to work, right? It's going to fail. So what happens when everyone has to come together? I think they come together in a Bitcoin denominated energy market. And if they do come together in a Bitcoin denominated energy market, then we're actually going to have a proper resettling of real estate, stock market, all the kinds of things that we need to settle and recalibrate so that Americans can have as good a life as people in Budapest and people in Barbados. So we're not far now, team. We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah, it's the ABC peace plan, man. It's the ABC peace plan. We're gonna get there. It's a shitcoin, guys. The BRICS is just a shitcoin. Yeah, it's a shitcoin. It's not gonna have any credibility. Who would buy a Russia, China, Brazil, India coin? I mean, these they're not that credible when it comes to money, right? I mean, they're credible in other ways. Bitcoin is like rain in politics. Tofu drag buildings. Yeah, those are the ones in China are pretty bad. Now, look, I'm not saying you're going to get the best built house in the world if you go to Hungary, and I'm not even telling you to go to Hungary, right? But there's other places. Yeah, Brick Shitcoin Peace Plan is awesome. I'm finally grokking. We're getting there, guys. Remember, World War III is psychological and economic, and there's only one solution to those two problems. It's Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is a psychological commodity. So it's psychological money. All the money is psychological. Bitcoin explicitly, right? Bitcoin explicitly. Yeah, two for drug buildings. Bitcoin is like rain, and politics is like salt. Yeah, just by big. Never said. Well, Joe. Like I said, there was a tweet. Let me share it with you guys. I don't know if I have it here. No, it didn't. It didn't update. Anyway, but it's along those lines, right? Selling Bitcoin. I did it. I sold Bitcoin to buy my farm in Vermont. Um, Nothing wrong with that, guys. Right? The freedom I get from that is psychologically helpful. Right? Taxes never go down on a house. You could pay off for 300 and lose it to the government and don't pay. Yeah, that's terrible. I know. My tax bill's a pain in my ass. Christian reminds us: smash the like button. Tell Bitcoiners about the breakup. Indeed. We're going to be doing more content coming up, though, so we're going to be telling more people ourselves. Um, if you sell your house and buy another, yeah. Money down plus financialization of homes. Yeah. I often wonder if house prices are expensive because the house value goes up or the value of our money goes down. Yeah, I mean to me it's the value of the money and its ability to fulfill its role. Right? You should be able saving money should be low IQ. Save it. It should be as simple as that. Right? But what they've made saving money into is move to a area with good property values, and then your house price will go up. So you got to buy a house, which means you got to get a job, and that's what saving money's become. I mean, who can do that, right? It's hard. Like some, I know people, right? But guess who the people I know are? I mean, 130 IQ minimum, right? These are people that not just were good at college and all that; they were the best, right? I know some of the best top graduates of all these fancy colleges that got the immediate driver service to go to their first job at the bank, and they move billions and billions and billions of dollars. Right? They bought a house, no problem. Right? But it's just them. They're the only ones I know. Right? Or business, flipping houses and building a portfolio and profiting off of Airbnb. Yeah, 30-year mortgage is unsustainable. Yeah. Randomness. Yeah, well, it's pretty randomness. Oh, I gotta see what Justin wrote about Zihan. Zihan is one of the most clear examples of Gelman amnesia. Incredibly insightful on demographic based in geopolitics, but is highly regarded when it comes to money. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, Abe, sorry to tell you, man, Abe was a propagandist. He was a propagandist. We love him anyway, but there's more to him than all that, right? There is more to him than all that. It's not as simple. All right, team. Peace. I got to do a call in 1 minute. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for your patience while I was gone. I missed y'all, and we'll be here every day again. We're back. We're back. We're back. We're back. So see ya. See you tomorrow. Catch you on Twitter.